Welcome to Pandas Nightmares. In today's video, you will hear stories from people who experienced glitches in the Matrix. If you do like my content, do like and subscribe as it will help me grow. I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And now let's get started. Enjoy. Story 1. When I was around 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora, pronounced Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months, she stopped showing up and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009, I'm in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So I stopped the car but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second, they get on the highway. Some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't have got that phone call. Called back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. Never had goosebumps like that in me life. Called it again the next day because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers. We get to talking. I tell her my entire story, including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how. I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird to ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. Check her Facebook. Holy fuck, it's her. Story 2. The Parallel Universe Answering Machine. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend up and he wasn't home, so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, "Hey, it's me, Killer Extremist. Sorry I missed you. Call you later. Bye." And then I hung up and left the house. I made no other calls. Later that day he called back and he says, "Wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" I wasn't talking to any girl. Well, as it turns out, the message didn't end after I said bye. I had to go over to his house and listen to this message a few times. After my initial message that I did leave, as quoted above, there was a slight pause, and it continues on for another 30 to 40 seconds or so with me talking to some girl. It was my voice, but a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I didn't recognize. You could compare it to the message I know I did leave, and the two voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice, but, talking mannerisms. It was my voice. Also, references to my occupation and activities were the same. Basically, in this conversation, I was talking to this girl about going skiing, but I had to go down to my shop and work on a car first, which totally correlated to me. Then the message just stopped. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that recorded the message to a chip, so there was no tape I could have taken and had analyzed. Unfortunately, also, neither I nor my friend had party lines, so that's not an explanation. It was very freaky. I can't explain it. Story 3. Driving home on a storm day, I see that a side road up to the local golf course is blocked off by flashing barricades. I also spy a Mercedes parked past the barricades with its hazards on. I stop and walk up to the car to see if they need help. I'm an EMT. I shine my light in the back seat to see a man slumped over, apparently asleep. Thinking I've got a few drunks, I move up to the driver window and rap on the glass and shine my light in. The driver is sitting bolt upright, unmoving, staring straight ahead. My window wrapping or light doesn't cause him to blink, flinch, or move. I look over and the passenger is slumped forward onto the dash. This begins to creep me out. I call down to the sheriff's station and request a code, no lights, sirens. Unit up to my location to help me check them out. Doors are locked. While on the phone, I walk back to my truck to get my go bag, as I'm on the phone with dispatch. She asks me to get a license number for the car, just as a PG and E power company. Cherry picker truck comes, rumbling down from up the closed road. I move to go around the truck to get the plate number, and the car is gone. I talked to the driver of the truck and he said there was a 80-foot tree down across the road, and that he didn't think it'd be open for a day or so. So the question is, the hell did the car go? Tree up one way, barricades down the other. It's kept me a bit unsettled when stopping at accidents, hazards since then. Story 4. This happened to me in 3rd grade, and it scared me so much I started crying and had to go to the office to talk to the principal about it. I was in the hallway for misbehaving, and my neighbor Tad, a year younger than me, came walking out of a class to my right, passed in front of me, and headed down some stairs. We said hi to each other. About 20 seconds later, he walked out of the same class, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. I just stared at him, confused and afraid, and he looked back like, "Why the F are you looking at me like that?" I never realized how much it was like Matrix deja vu. Story 5. At 12 years of age, my mum let me stay in the truck as she went grocery shopping. As I wait, I see an old guy walking towards the truck with an indescribable look at me as if I know too much. He stops 5 feet from the truck, looks at me for a couple seconds, and heads back the exact way he came. It was rather traumatic for some reason, and very confusing at that age. 5 to 6 years later, my dad was showing me home videos of us at Yellowstone. At Old Faithful, I noticed the same guy, same look, same clothes peering at us on camera and at me through the TV. I'm freaked out just telling this. Story 6. At a friend's place back in 2008. When we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed at a friend's that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, TV, fridge, etc. The whole lot. One night, we were all hanging out in there when I decided I needed a piss. I walked out the front door of the shed and started to walk to the right when I stopped. Now let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left, and to the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out you're left with empty fields and trees. It was dark by now, the lights from the house illuminating the space between the house and our cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5 to 10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple trees and a car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back into the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows. Me: "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" Him: "What do you mean?" Me: "He just walked off behind the cars." Brother: "I'm right here." I looked over and there his brother was sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the exact same clothes as I saw him in, and the only way to get into the shed was through the door that I was standing in the way of. To this day, I've no idea how it all happened. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like that happen. Story 7. I got my wisdom teeth out in 2000, right? Around the time that the original Matrix came out on VHS. I was bombed completely out of my mind on Percocet. After coming back from the surgery, I had awful wisdom teeth. And my mum basically just dropped me in bed and went and rented the movie for me, because I'd never seen it in theaters. I remember being irritated that the sun through the window was making the TV glare, but being too out of it to get up. A little bit after the black cat glitch in the Matrix scene, I passed out and apparently slept for about 8 hours. The tape in the VHS machine kept rewinding itself and playing over and over again. I woke up and the movie was at roughly the same spot as when I passed out, but it was completely dark outside. 0 time-lapse for me. Completely lost my mind. Started freaking out and screaming because I thought I'd discovered the secret and somebody turned off the sun. I remember crying and trying to explain to my panicked family, who have never let me live it down. Story 8. My dad had this little toy monkey that he used to call his favorite child, and tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a bad way, but it was really frustrating to us, and we spent hours trying to steal it from him. ... Well, anyways, one day we finally got it and threw it into the garbage after drawing on it and mangling it for a bit. We might add laughed and searched for it a bit, but basically figured we had thrown it out and gave up after a week or so. Anyways, a few years later, when I was about 17, I'm walking down the street in Toronto I don't live in too. Was just visiting friends, and see this little orange object on the side of the road. When I walk over to it, I pick it up and see that it was the exact same fucking monkey. It even had the black Sharpie lines on it from when we drew all over it. I honestly cannot even come up with the chances of that happening, especially considering our garbage is sent to a local dump and is nowhere near Toronto. Story 9. I was a satellite installer and I was driving between 2 small towns in North Carolina, Statesville and Taylorsville. It's about a 20-minute drive of a perfectly straight 2-lane road with pretty much nothing but trees on either side. It's the middle of the day and I'm driving along listening to Howard Stern on Sirius, when all of a sudden I go from wide awake to falling asleep. Meaning, 1 second I'm normal, and a second later my head is drooping down and eyes closing, and what snaps me out of it is my car bounces like I just hit a speed bump. But I'm still in the middle of the road. Howard Stern is still in the same sentence, but my GPS signal says it is lost. And then I hear recalculating, and when it comes back I realize I am about 12 miles further down the road than I was, and I had missed my turn by 5 miles. My immediate thought, even though I consider myself a level-headed atheist, was that I fell asleep, hit a tree and died, and was now in some weird afterlife. It was such a strong feeling that I drove to the nearest gas station, got out, headed inside with a sweaty palms feeling that the cashier inside was not going to be able to see me. To my relief she did, and I bought a Red Bull. I still think I was hypnotized by the road and drove on some weird autopilot for a while. But losing GPS signal and not missing any of Howard Stern is explainable to me. I even used the Sirius ability to rewind, and there was none of the show that I missed. Story 10. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on in the lowest basement. I had the only key. There was a wired phone in there, and I did work late some nights, but not this night. I was sleeping alone in my apartment when I woke up to a call on my cell phone from my girlfriend at 3 a.m. She was in hysterics and asking why I scared her. Apparently she received a call from that basement phone just a minute earlier, with someone who sounded like me slowly repeating her name until crackling and fading out. My apartment was 10 miles away from work. I thought she was lying, but I saw the 3 a.m. call from the basement phone logged on her cell myself. Still freaks me the fuck out. Story 11. I have 2 stories that are just weird as fuck. Both of them are things I just would not believe if someone else told them to me. But I can swear with every fiber of my being that they happened as I write them here. The first happened a couple years ago. I can't remember the occasion, but my mother and I had gone to A&W for lunch, and we were both sitting there eating our meals. We happened to be seated pretty close to the washroom doors, so I noticed everyone going in and out. First person to come out is this old man who's kind of hobbling along. He walked past and I looked at him and went on with my meal. Not 30 seconds later, another man comes out of the bathroom, and at this point I get a little freaked out, because I realize it's the exact same person. Same limp, clothing, face, everything. A couple minutes later, the same thing happens, except it's an old woman this time. She comes out, then 30 seconds later, comes right out of the bathroom again. My mum took a look at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just kind of stammered a bit, then wrote it off as me being crazy. The next story is more weird, in my opinion, and is the single strangest occurrence of my life. This happened when I was about 9 years old, but I can still remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Nevada with my dad, and they lived out in a very dry area in a fairly good-sized trailer. A couple days in, I was playing outside with my cousin, pretty much just messing around in the dirt. At some point, I look up. Right next to the house is a field, I guess, surrounded by a wire fence, probably originally for livestock. But anyway, there's this guy standing there. This is a good 300 or more feet away, so I cannot see him clearly at all. Cue the weird. As soon as I look at this guy, I have what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. My body pretty much just went into lockdown, and I was no longer seeing through my eyes. And I wasn't just floating there or anything. I was in that man's body. Through his eyes, I could see 2 little shapes playing across the field, but I could just feel that he saw the shapes as animals. And then I realized he was holding a fucking shotgun. After that, I regained my body and blurted out, "We have to go indoors," offering no explanation to my cousin, who thought I was nuts. I didn't tell anyone because I just didn't know how to express it to other people back then. I've only since told my brothers, but I don't think they believed me. It still freaks me out when I think about it today, because it's the only time I've ever lost control of my body. It was almost like a dream, but the whole thing felt like it was happening in slow motion. Story 12. I used to work in music and toured with this band. The guitarist Josh, of the band's best friend Matt, had died a couple years back. He always talked about the kid, and he seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street, which, supposedly, was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dreams, Matt would take a bulb from the street light on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They were huge Bright Eyes fans and wanted to stop in Cassadaga. Florida Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there, and it's a really creepy, spiritual medium place. It might be worth noting that 6/7 of the people I was with are all atheists. So we drive into Cassadaga around 2 or 3 a.m. and drive around. Suddenly, this big black dog comes in the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guys in this band were weird as fuck and were saying things like, "Follow the dog. It's trying to show us something." And in my mind, I'm just thinking they are all fucking idiots. We followed this dog for a few blocks, as it was walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden, we turn a street, and the dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says, "Stop the fucking van." This is it. We are all confused, and he gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dreams. We hang out for about 15 minutes, and from the way he described the street, from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely the street. As we get in the van, a street light goes off and we just drive off. He claims he never had any more dreams about it, as that was closure on everything. Story 13. I was at my girlfriend at the time's parents' house, and suddenly started feeling really queasy. She and I headed to the kitchen so I could get a glass of water, and we stood with me leaning back against the counter and her hugging me. She was saying I had gone incredibly pale, like almost white, and my lips were going a purpley color. She looked really scared. I then say to her, I can't feel my heart. And I check my pulse. Next thing I know, I'm in this place. I can't describe it except as an absence of absolutely everything. There was a floor, but I couldn't see it. I was walking on nothing, through nothing, and surrounded by nothing. But I was there, and it was there. There were other people with me. Discernible faces, clothes and demeanors. I could see them, and they could see me. Like, properly see me. Not just look at me, but actually see me. I could feel that they could. We were all there in complete silence, just really calm and silent, and in this space of nothingness. And then this bright, bluish-white light erupted from the distance, and it called to us, silently beckoned us all towards it, so we started walking. I don't know why, we all just felt compelled as a single entity to head towards this light. It was beautiful. Really fucking beautiful. I have never seen a light so pure or so beautiful since. I have never felt a calm so serene, and a strange happiness was flowing through me. I could feel myself smiling and feeling like all was right with everything in the world. Suddenly, I started being dragged backwards, as if a fishing hook had just grasped my intestines from behind and was pulling me. I felt intense pain, and there was a rushing sound. The light got more and more distant, as did the people, and there was what I can only describe as a blood-curdling scream fading in from behind me. As this got louder, and as soon as the light faded, I woke up. I was on the floor of my girlfriend's kitchen. Her mother, a nurse, had just performed CPR on me, as I had been actually full-on dead, no pulse, no breathing. For about a minute, I felt like I was in that space for an eternity. The scream was my girlfriend, crying hysterically at the thought of me being dead. I promptly threw up everywhere, and felt instantly better. Even doctors at hospital don't know what the fuck happened to me. I was discharged after a few hours of tests with a clean bill of health and felt completely fine. What's even stranger is, apparently when I said I can't feel my heart, I passed out and fell onto my girlfriend, who couldn't support me, and I fell, hitting my head off the counter and smashing into some empty bottles on the floor. Whilst I was out, I had apparently just stayed still, but smiled until I stopped breathing. I was pale, and my head and hands were freezing cold to the touch, but the rest of me was still warm. What's even stranger than that is that her pet cats freaked the literal fuck out when I was dead, and all ran out of the house, howling into the night. One of them returned the next morning. The other two were found up a tree a few blocks away, meowing incessantly. Story 14. My dad used to get up around 3 a.m. every morning for work. Starting at a very early age, I would wake up on my own and wander downstairs to see him before he left. One morning when I was about 4 years old, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and noticed that the front door was ajar. I opened it up and saw my father in his favorite work shirt, making his way down the driveway to his truck in his typical workout, plaid shirt and dickies. I swung the door open wide and yelled for him to come back for a hug before he left. He slowly turned around and just stared at me and started walking back towards the house. He was looking so strangely at me that it started to scare me, and I began crying and asking what was wrong. Just as he had almost reached me, a pair of arms encircled me from behind in a bear hug. I turned my head to see my understandably freaked out father staring at his doppelganger in the same outfit. The double took one look at my dad and ran down the driveway. Meanwhile, my dad yanked me in the house and locked the door. Weirdest morning ever. Never did quite figure that one out. I would not trust my 4-year-old memory of the event if it wasn't also witnessed by my father. He won't really talk about it these days, but my mom has since told me that he called out of work and she spent the day reassuring him he wasn't a nutcases. Story 15. Hope this gets read. I was a sophomore in high school at my girlfriend's house watching a movie. It was around 10 p.m. when the flick ended. I proceed to skateboard home. I only live like 2 blocks away, and it was a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm skating down the hill towards a larger street, larger but never really busy, especially not at night. When I reach the intersection, I nail a rock. I had planned on blasting across the street, since there were no cars coming either direction. I fly off the board, skid a good 3 or 4 feet on my head, right shoulder, hip, and knee. I rolled to my back and screamed out in agony. The pain was so bad I couldn't really move. I look up the road, and about 30 yards off is a car coming down the way. And where I landed, I was right in its path, to Lane Street. I was right in the middle of his lane. My head was aligned with the wheel. I tried like hell to move. I screamed. I yelled. I couldn't do anything. Car was about 15 yards off. He doesn't see me. Makes no attempt to swerve. 10 yards. I hear him barreling down. I close my eyes. Brace. Nothing. Open eyes. Look where the car had been. Nothing. Hear the car behind me. Look where it was supposed to be in the other direction. Taillights cruising up the road. I hadn't moved. He didn't swerve. It was like he passed through me, or I passed through him. There isn't really any way he could have passed over me, not with the way I had landed and was positioned in the street. It was a little car. I can't explain it. I got up, terrified, bloody, and baffled, hobbled home and went to sleep. No one believed me, but it's fucking true. Story 16. 2 years ago, I had a dream that Anne Misha ripped through most of my house and my neighbor's house. It reminded me of something out of a war movie, when a bomb goes off and my roommate and I are disoriented and semi-deaf as we walk around the fire and rubble, screaming and looking for roommates and neighbors. It felt very real and painful and was horrific. I woke up really shaken and told my roommate about it in the morning. About 3 hours later, my whole house starts rumbling and we hear the sound of like a turbine engine powering down directly over my house, followed by 2 huge explosions. We run outside and there is billowing black smoke. We run around the block to the houses on the other side and see 2 houses completely ripped through by a fighter jet. The houses were completely destroyed and what was still standing was on fire. We tried walking around and yelling to see if anyone was in the houses. It was then when my roommate reminded me of my dream. I like to say coincidence because I don't believe that, but I still can't explain it. Story 17. My family owns a house on Cape Cod. The previous owner was a white supremacist with an autistic son named Jimmy. Jimmy was known for putting on a trench coat and fedora, climbing trees, and shooting cats and dogs with a BB gun. When my parents moved into the house, they found a bunch of Nazi paraphernalia in a bedroom. They put it in the shed, told the former owner they had a week to get rid of it, and then threw it out. Of course, at the age of 7, I didn't know any of this. That's when I was visited 5 nights in a row by a figure in a trench coat and fedora. He didn't have any detail. He looked like a silhouette, like he was being powerfully backlit, but with no light source. He would stand in the corner of the room, or sit there crouched, or sit on the bed opposite mine, my brother's bed, but he was at summer camp at the time. One time, he sat in a rocking chair, and when I looked later, he was gone, but the chair was still rocking. After a few nights of this, I told my parents about it. My mum called it a nightmare, but my dad was intrigued. He told me to tell the figure, "Jimmy, I don't have your stuff." So the next night, when the figure appeared again in the corner of the room, I said, "Jimmy, I don't have your stuff." And Jimmy walked right over to me, put his face an inch away from mine, and then disappeared. I never saw him again. Years later, I found out about the history of the house. I've often wondered if I had heard it before, and somehow suppressed it, and then imagined my encounters with Jimmy. But he was, and remains, entirely vivid to me. Story 18. I was driving home from my girlfriend's one night. Going home the back way. Where I live is very flat, so the road I was on was dead straight, with no bumps, small hills, or any places the road got higher or lower or anything like that. So I'm just driving straight. Got my high beams on because there's no one around, and I can see everything in front of me. There's no houses on either side, no driveways, just fields. Nothing behind me either. Out of nowhere, a car appears about 20 feet in front of me, driving the opposite direction on the other side of the road. I was going pretty fast, so I passed them quickly, and when I look in my rear view, there's nothing there. Freaked me out so bad I had to pull over and gather my thoughts before I could keep going. Still freaks me out to remember it. Story 19. I was working in a decades-old nursing home out in the middle of the woods in PA. As a nurse aide on the night shift. Wife won't come visit me at work because she insists it looks like a Rob Zombie video. A resident pulls the mechanical call bell in the bathroom for assistance. I flip it off and help her back to bed. As I'm exiting the only way in or out, the call bell goes on again. I look back, and it's not the electronic one in her bedroom, which blinks slowly. It's the mechanically operated one you have to physically pull in the bathroom, which blinks twice as fast. The lady is close to 400 pounds, a non-ambulatory. There is no physical way she could have pulled that bell. I sure as hell did not, and there was no one else around. Story 20. My father died in 2008, a night before visiting his house for the last time. He appeared in my dream, where he handed to me a black camera in a plastic bag, and specifically said, "Take this camera, as I won't be needing it anymore," and I took it from him. First thing in the morning, I visit his house, where most of the stuff is already moved by my uncle, and open one of his wardrobes, find a sealed cardboard box deep inside, rip it open with a knife, and take out his retro black camera. Apparently my uncle missed that one, and took off all his other electronics, but the camera. All I can say is that this experience was a proper communication, and it significantly eased my pain, knowing that something remains after a loved one passes. Story 21. In high school, I was in the drumline, and we usually practiced early in the morning prior to school starting. We were inside the band room that day because it was fairly cold. So anyway, I'm doing my thing, playing the tenors toms for the layman, and I drop one of my mallets. I turn to pick it up, and I can't find it. There is about 10 feet of open bare floor surrounding me and nowhere to be found. My instructor stops us and basically just asks me what the problem is. So several of us start searching around. Can't find it. I say screw it and grab a spare set. About 20 minutes later, the band director walks in, unlocks his office, sits at his desk and knocks on the window. I look up and he picks up the mallet off his desk, with a look like, "What is this doing in here?" I could verify that it was mine because I marked each set. Nobody had gone in or out, no gap under the door, locked room, ended up on the desk. There were 15 of us in the room at that time, and there was a unanimous nope moment. I was stunned, and one of my buddies came unglued. We pretty much cancelled the rest of rehearsal right there, and many of us were pretty bugged about it the rest of the day. I couldn't concentrate on anything for almost a week after that. Eventually, my brain just filed it away under unsolved mysteries, and I went on with life. Story 22. Ever since I was a kid, I have what I call doubling occasionally happen around me. I've put something in a pocket, then later find it in another pocket, as well as the original in the pocket I had put it in. And yes, it has happened to Marnie before. Score. The most standout example was when I was a teen at camp. All the leaders had engraved plastic name tags, and we were only issued one. I used to keep moving mine between my hat and my shirt. At the end of camp, I just crammed all my stuff in a duffel and headed home. Later, when I unpack, the first thing I do is pull out my hat with the tag on it. Okay, so that's where I had it last. And of course, a minute later, I pull out a shirt with the same NAMA tag pinned to it. I also experienced a similar phenomenon when I was a kid. For a few years it happened on a daily basis, but haven't seen it in a long time. Someone would place something in their pocket, backpack, etc. But when they went to grab it later, it would be missing. I would then reach into my pocket, backpack, whatever, and pull the item out. I initially got accused of being a thief, but when it happened repeatedly, when I hadn't even been within 20 feet of the victim, my friends and classmates stopped doing so and just kind of accepted that that would happen around me. Story 23. I can't explain this, and I hardly believe it myself. I've only ever told a couple of people, all of whom refused to believe it could happen. On 2 occasions I have breathed underwater with no mechanical assistance. I was about 11 when it first happened. I was swimming one afternoon in the diving well at my gym. The pool is about 14 feet deep, with a fairly small surface area. I've always been a strong and confident swimmer, and loved to dive to the bottom of the pool and flip over, open my eyes, and look up at the surface. So, I dive down, and sitting against the wall, I have the overwhelming urge to breathe in. I refuse this thought, disbelieving and scoffing at my brain's sheer strangeness. But the thought comes again, and it is utterly convincing. I can't explain why I decided to breathe in. I just know that I wouldn't ever choose to do that, but in this instance I did. I took the most careful, mincing breath in. I could feel great pressure, but I breathed normally. It was air I breathed, and not water. I took 4 full breaths while sitting at the bottom of the pool, and after each breath I became more horrified and agitated. My disbelief was outstanding. I kind of freaked and shot to the surface quick as I could. After I rationalized a bit, I calmed down. My logical mind kept thinking that somehow I'd had a bubble of air caught on my face, for how else could I have breathed like that? But over the years of trying to make sense of it, 30 years old now, I recognize that air always finds its way to the surface expediently. It won't just catch around someone's face. I tried to do it again that day, diving and diving, trying to replicate the experience. Got quite a bit of water up my nose before I gave up. It did happen a second time, same pool, 4 years later. I took 5 breaths, same feeling of overwhelming confidence that it would be okay to breathe. Couldn't explain it the second time either. Very strange. Glitch? I don't know. No one has ever believed me, but I've only ever mentioned it to a select few. I still can't figure it out. Does anyone have any physics, logic, thoughts on this? Has this happened to anyone else? Story 24. At 16-year-old, sitting in a circle of friends at a party, stoned, someone I had bad relations with threw a lighter at my head without warning from the side. Couldn't see it, long hair, caught it like a ninja. turned slowly and stared at the thrower, who went pale. Never fucked with me again. No idea how I did that. Sitting in a bar with some friends, laughing, joking, pop. Something in my head went pop, and I felt like my brain had been reset for a split second. Talked to others about it. They had no idea what I was talking about. Then I said, "Gary's here." I thought he was here for some reason. About 20 seconds later, Gary walks into the bar. Still not sure what happened. Tell him about it all later. He says he came because I called him. I checked my phone. Did not call. He has no record of it either. It's like someone reversed time and fucked up some of the details of the memory wipe. Those are the two most memorable I can think of. Oh, there was also the time I got really stoned and this block of chocolate on my computer desk disappeared. It just kind of gradually vanished over a couple of hours. Story 25. I was driving home from college one day, and I pulled up at a red light at an intersection. The car in front of me was one of those aqua teal Honda Civics that were popular in the mid to late 90s. I looked to my right. The gas station marquee says something like, "Always be aware of your surroundings when you shift." That's not verbatim, but I remember shift being capitalized for some reason. I thought it was kind of peculiar, and that's when I noticed that the car immediately to my right was, in fact, another the same colored Honda Civics. Okay, interesting coincidence. Then I figure, what the hell? How funny would it be if... And look in my rearview mirror. Yep, aqua teal Civic behind me. So I looked to my left. Sure enough, same car. I'm surrounded by them on all sides. I chuckled to myself, thinking it's nothing. The light turns green and we begin to move. 3 of the Civics move in to the right lane. As they're traveling next to me, I notice that they have no license plates. There are drivers, and the interiors are all tan or ecru. They all merge on to a northbound route, and I continue on my way. For the past 15 years, I've maintained that I somehow shifted. Hey, the marquee's words. Not mine. Into a dimension other than the one in which I was born. I bring this up when things seem really off in the world. Example, Rick Santorum, a viable presidential candidate. Sigh. I really need to find a way back to my home dimension. Story 26. Right after high school, I got a job lifeguarding at a water park resort. I had been there about a year, and by that point, dreaming about work was pretty routine. The dreams weren't usually about anything dramatic, like rescuing a distressed swimmer or doing CPR. But on this particular occasion, I had a dream that one of my co-workers rescued an unconscious boy from a particular pool. In the dream, I was only assisting with the first aid, not the primary in the rescue, but I remember clearly what the boy looked like. I went back to work the next day after the dream, after having a few days off, and about halfway through my shift, I see the kid from the dream walking through the park with his family. They were still in their street clothes and had just checked in, so there was no way I could have seen him before. I nearly fell out of my chair. He didn't drown, but holy fuck was I careful to keep an eye on him the whole time he was visiting. Story 27. My husband and I met in our late 20s. We grew up near each other, but went to different high schools and colleges. We're a few years apart and hung with completely different crowds. My parents put in a bid on the house next door to his parents. When I was about 11, it fell through and we moved elsewhere. While in college, he traveled to my school to compete in a game. Since it was homecoming, he ended up briefly watching the parade. Out of hundreds of people, he remembers me and telling his friend I was a cool chick. Not only had I been drinking, but I was dressed as a crab and standing next to Ariel from The Little Mermaid. I nearly shat myself when he told me about watching me dance badly around in the street and take pictures with the little kids while attending a house party with my now husband. I was looking at pics on the walls taken at parties his friends had thrown back in high school. I was on one side of a pic, and he was on the other side of the big group. I went to about 20 parties back in the day, and I do not remember ever partying anywhere near his area. My husband and I were best friends with a guy and girl who were cousins. We both went to endless family gatherings, but never met. We heard stories about each other, and had never even seen a picture of one another. After 6 years, we finally met and were an item by the end of the night, and we've been together ever since. Story 28. I grew up in North Texas, and one of my friends has a cow farm and a lot of land. The name of the street he lived on was his family name. Me and my friends would go out there a lot on weekends, way out on the land far from his house. Bring a guitar and some weed, and make a campfire and just hang out. One summer night, my friend asked if we wanted to see a haunted house. He said it wasn't really haunted per se, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere and was abandoned. He said he'd driven by it a few times on farm routes, but he never had the stones to go explore it himself, especially not at night. It was one of those times where no one wanted to be the first to say no, so we all said yes. It was a cool, clear night, and we piled into my friend's sedan car. We were listening to some good classic rock tunes and generally enjoying ourselves. We came to an area where we had to drive over a very old river, which was now a stream. This stream had eroded this patch of land for so long that it had become a very, very steep depression. There was a large plank of wood across the remainder of the stream, making it a flat enough plane to drive across. Our friend assured us it was safe for the car, even though it looked like the angle was too steep for a car to cross without being damaged. By this point, the atmosphere had changed. We were no longer just hanging out, all fancy-free. Few of us were speaking because we were just looking at the windows, at the dark, looming trees and expanses of moonlit grass. We held our breath as we crossed the stream, and when we crossed it, there was a sea change in the way I felt. It was as if I could sense the house getting closer. No one had said a word for the past 10 minutes, other than my friend giving us time estimates of how much further we were from the house. There was nothing out here, not even a paved road. There was a dirt road formed from cars, but it was very old and overgrown, as if it had not been used, except perhaps sparingly, for a decade. Suddenly, I became aware of something that had been present for a good portion of the trip, but had occurred so slowly that I hardly noticed. I broke the silence. Everything is black and white. I can only see black and white. Everyone else in the car started to freak out, because they could only see black and white, too. There was no color anywhere, just shades of black, like an old photo. "Are we dead?" I asked. I was convinced we had died along the way, but had not been aware we were dead, like a horror movie. I still have no explanation for this. We pulled up to the house. Color had returned, it seemed, but it was so dark that it didn't matter anyway. The house was 2 stories, at a slight tilt, and the face of the house looked menacingly down at us. It was an old southern house, with white pillars that had become discolored with age, and 4 balconies jutting out from under the 2nd-story windows. About 50 meters from the house was a large, metallic silo. As the headlights from our car washed over the area, the darkness took its time to leave because it had become so settled there. We began walking slowly towards the house. In the front yard, there were lots of holes in the ground, freshly dug, about the size to fit a small, potted houseplant. Inside the holes we found crumpled up pieces of paper. On the paper were crude drawings, like children's drawings. They were of people, stick figures. Some of the stick figures would be upside down or laying down. Some of the stick figures had faces, and they were all sad, or yelling about something. We went to the silo. It was unlocked. We went inside with a flashlight and lit up the interior portion by portion with the beam from the flashlight. It was totally empty and gleamed like polished chrome. It smelt like sawdust and old oats. I swore I heard the sound of a girl crying, but that might have been the sound of the hinges on the door. Finally, we went to the house. The doors were all broken off the hinges. There was a screen door, and it was partly torn. We went inside. We broke up into groups and tried to explore the whole thing. We were all trying to seem brave, saying things like, "The thing I'm most afraid of is the floor falling in." There were closets, and we'd hold our breath before we'd open the doors, but found nothing inside. The whole house was completely dark and empty. We only had one flashlight, so there might have been parts that we had missed, but we wanted to get the hell out of there. We got back to the car. One of my friends dared someone to go into the house by himself and sit in the living room and close his eyes for 30 seconds. He said he would do it. I couldn't believe it. I could never do that. He walked off proudly towards the house. We saw him go inside. The living room was the first room on the first floor, past the foyer beyond the door. Several minutes passed. We thought he was fucking with us, wanting one of us to go in after him, so he could give them a scare. That's when we noticed the smell. Something smelled awful in the car. My friend who was driving looked down and saw a dead cat crammed down underneath the pedals. Then we noticed there was cat fur strewn about the car. We freaked out and started honking the horn and flashing the headlights at the house. Our friend didn't come out. Finally, me and my other friend went in after him. When he got to the living room, we found him sitting on the floor, huddled over, his back to a wall with his arms wrapped around his knees and his head buried in his legs. He looked up at us as if we should run away, as if it was too late. We told him to get off his ass so we could get the fuck out of there. He pointed at the wall behind us. The lights from the car were still flashing, trying to get us to leave. Each time the lights flashed, we could see it. All of our names were written on the wall in red. Later that summer, a friend of mine went back to the house during the day and burned it down. Story 29. I used to work at Speedway for over a year and such. I started smoking there. Had a nervous breakdown there. Oh, by the way, it was a teeny speedway right next to the ghetto. Anyway, one evening I was working by myself. Again, because it was so tiny and I even closed by myself. And one of my usual customers had come in to ask for a pack of Marlboro Reds 100s, the tall pack, soft pack. Now, having worked for a while, my way of grabbing the cigarette packs from their little homes and tossing them onto the counter had become quite sophisticated. This particular pack, I grabbed between my index and middle finger and swung my arm downward toward my side, still holding it like that. But as my arm came down and finished its curve, the pack left my fingers and vanished. There was no sound of the pack hitting the floor, nor the wall. It did not fly backwards into the open security door that was behind me. The pack left my fingers and left this realm of reality. The customer stood there just as dumbfounded as I was, and the two of us stood in total silence before I slowly grabbed a second pack and reattempted said stunt, just to hear what it would have sounded like. It made an odd thap noise, you know? The kind of sound you would expect a pack of cigs to make if it hit something. So I sold him the pack, still a bit freaked out, and then proceeded to check the entire store for that lost pack. I even went across the store and checked behind racks and so forth. You know, a distance that would be impossible for the pack to travel. Nothing, though it was cool, I guess. Still kind of freaky. I have other similar stories about things like this, such as water cups that have vanished on me, chocolate, toys, childhood toys that is, Now that I think about it, this sort of thing happens to me a lot. Maybe I'm a wormhole. Sweet. Story 30. It happened 2 days after I turned 8. I lived in Finland, and we had just moved into town. Our apartment was in these cheap rental high-rises, 8th floor. My grandma had given me a few comic books as a present, and I had been reading them ever since the party, quite a stack. Something like 10 to 15 individual comics. There was this one book, a Spider-Man comic. It wasn't about the usual Spidey, but something about Peter Parker's clone acting as Crimson Spider-Man. I had just returned from school, so my parents were still at work, and I started reading this comic. At some page, the protagonist is crouching on a roof, jumps down and lands into the Spidey crouch, hands between his legs. Without thinking anything, I just laid down the comic, walked to our balcony and climbed on the fence, using a chair as a ladder. As I was sitting there, I see some man down and across the street. He saw me sitting there and started running towards our house. At this same moment, I had this really calm feeling taking over me. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes and jumped down. When I jumped, I could hear the man scream, "Ei jumalata." 1-inch nitrogen monoxide, followed by an abbreviation to God help me. Then I just heard wind in my ears. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground, crouching like Spider-Man. The man runs around some high bushes just when I stand up, stops dead on his tracks, and all color escapes his face. He just stood there with absolute terror in his eyes, completely silent and looking at me for a few seconds before backing away slowly, without turning his face off me before he's back at the corner, where he turns away. I returned to the lower door, only to find out I had left my key inside. So I just sat down and waited for my father to return from work, something like 1 hour. He was naturally surprised to find me there, without my backpack. I told him what had happened. "Dad, I'm Spider-Man." When we were in the elevator, Dad thought it was just my imagination. When we returned inside and he saw my comic book laid open on the ground, with the page featuring the jump and the balcony door left open, he took away the particular comic book and never allowed me on the balcony. Before I turned 12 and we moved to a bit better house, 3rd floor. He also becomes disoriented every time I mention this to him and changes the subject quickly. Although he does admit he found me downstairs and balcony door was open, I still remember this occasionally, clear as day. Bonus story. I have never been able to explain this one, and it still haunts me to this day. Not sure if it exactly fits as a glitch at the Matrix, but perhaps a past life type of thing. I have only ever shared this with a few people in my life, so here you go, internet. Anyway, when I was around 5 years old, my father, his girlfriend at the time, and myself visited a theme park. While we were walking around, I saw this girl my age and instantly recognized her. I didn't know her name or where I knew her from. I just knew that I knew her and I had missed her. The look in her eyes when our eyes meet instantly told me that she recognized me too. We both ran towards each other and embraced in a tight hug in that cliché reunited way and started excitedly talking. I remember looking up at our parents and they were talking to each other and shrugging and laughing, like, what the fuck? Our parents allowed us to walk around with each other for a while, and eventually ride the tram thing to another part of the park. I remember when we rode on the tram, they let us sit in our own seat in front of them and we held hands. I remember eventually our parental units made us part ways, and the immense desire I had to not let her go. We hugged some more and went our separate ways, never to meet again that I know of. As I said, I have never forgotten this or found an explanation for it. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe and let me know below of your thoughts. If you want to help on my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.